Hi, my name's Clint Teague, and today I'm presenting on governance and regulatory policy compliance, particularly focusing on my issue-specific security policy. To start off, we need to talk about what security governance and policy are. So security governance comes from the board of directors and senior management, particularly the executive management, so CEO, CFO, CTO, that type of group, the C-suite executives. It's basically them setting the direction of the information security program. They take risk management into account. They have to focus on that to avoid risks as part of the information security policy. Now, the C-suite executives most involved in governance will be the CTO, CISO, and CEO. Now, all the other C-suite executives will have a little bit of a part of it because the information security policy affects all departments. So they're going to all be involved somewhat, but mostly those three executives and then the board. Now, what is policy? That's just management's written statement of intent. So it's basically management telling the organization what they want them to do, how to behave. So when the organization enforces policy, it's ensuring governance because it's making sure that the organization and its employees abide by the policy, which is coming directly from the top upper level management through the security governance process. Now that we understand the basics of security governance and policy, I can go into details on my issue-specific security policy. My policy covers the fair and responsible use of company computers, networks. This includes internet access from the office and using the internet services and organization networks, including email and the web. This policy is for the Bridington Boscovich Business Supplies, Inc., henceforth referred to as B3SI. Some of the technology covered in this policy are various software programs, including the Traverse accounting software, Traverse distribution software, Traverse ERP software, and Optimum HRIS. The accounting software is used by the finance department for finance purposes. The distribution software is used for inventory, sales orders, purchase orders, things like distributing the products. The Traverse ERP software, that's the web portals and customer relationship management. And Optimum HRIS, this is for things like human resources like payroll management, time and attendance, stuff like that. More technology used in my policy includes computers. This includes any mobile technology used to access B3SI systems, as well as any servers and desktops and really anything used to access the systems. So there's also the internet, so the World Wide Web, email, electronic mail, and then networks. So anytime computers are linked together, so for example, Wi-Fi networks, LAN networks, WAN networks. So now the responsibilities in this policy. So for governance, that would be the board of directors, executive management. So that C-suite group that we're talking about, primarily the CEO, CTO, and CISO, as well as the board. Now, users do have a responsibility to use our organizational networks and computers and internet services in accordance with our policy and for business purposes, as well as properly storing data and encrypting it as well. Now, the IT manager in particular is responsible for the administration, distribution, and enforcement of this policy. And the B3SI Information Security Department, they're responsible for doing all the getting usernames and passwords set up and with giving each user the proper privileges, basically according to their position, and role that they and job responsibilities that they have with the company. The CFO determines which users, based on their positions, will have access to the Traverse accounting software. The various sales, purchasing, and distribution managers, they determine the users that have access to the Traverse distribution software. The sales and IT managers determine which users have access to the Traverse ERP software, and the HR manager determines which users, based on their positions, have access to the Optimum HRIS software. At this point, one thing I do want to point out is that based on the organizational hierarchy, B3SI doesn't really have a specific information security department or CISO. Now, due to that, when referring to the information security department, it's assumed that it's under the IT manager at this point in the organization, and there's different people that he's placed on that team. With the CISO, when I refer to them as the person in charge, even if there's not the official position of CISO, it's going to be who's ever in charge of the manager for that portion of the IT team. Also, when I refer to any CTO, I'm referring to the IT manager in this case, since there's not a specific CTO position. So now on to authorized uses. So user access, that will be controlled by the B3SI Information Security Department previously discussed. So the managers that we just talked about, they will provide which users and people have access to which software to the B3SI Information Security Department, and they will then set up the logins with the proper permissions for that. Now, acceptable use does have to be on site, except for mobile technology. That is the one exclusion there. So in the case where B3SI has issued mobile technology to specific employees, they can use that technology outside of the office, but all other equipment will need to be on site, and it's not supposed to be taken off site. Personal devices should not be used in conjunction with B3SI systems. So that's including USB devices for storage, smartphones, or anything like that. There is an exception as part of the fair and responsible use policy to the personal device rule. That is when employees are off the clock, so like lunches or breaks, they can connect to the guest Wi-Fi network using those personal devices. Now, this is specifically when they're off the clock. When they're on the clock, they're supposed to be using the systems specifically for business activities and connecting from their office equipment, not using their personal devices. Now, employees do have to protect privacy, so all sensitive data should be protected to the utmost care. Now, we need to follow proper encryption and storage procedures in order to do so. And all of B3SI's data, especially the sensitive data, but all of it, should be used exclusively for B3SI's business activities. So now, what's prohibited? So any personal use of B3SI's computers, internet services, or networks is expressly prohibited. Same thing with personal devices. Those are not allowed to be used with B3SI systems. The one exception to this is specifically when employees are off the clock, they can connect any of their personal devices to the guest network for personal use, but when they're on the clock, they explicitly need to use these resources for business use. And B3SI's email system should only be used for B3SI business emails. Users can use their personal emails for their own messages. That's on their own time, of course, when they're off the clock. Using any of B3SI's computers, networks, or internet services for criminal use is not allowed. It may only be used for lawful business purposes. So anything unlawful is prohibited. Gaining access to B3SI's computers when you don't have authorization, or trying to get privileges that you don't have is also not allowed and could be considered criminal. Any criminal use will be referred to the proper authorities. B3SI does not tolerate any offensive or harassing materials. Those are an unacceptable use. Any of these behaviors should be reported to Human Resources to investigate, and then that could lead to any disciplinary or possibly criminal actions. Employees do need to take great care to make sure what they're looking at on their computers, even if it's on the guest network on their personal time, is not offensive or harassing. So they need to make sure no one else is around that they could possibly offend if they're looking at something that may be questionable. And when in doubt, it's better to just not look at that content or use it until they are at home on their own networks. Employees are also prohibited from using B3SI's equipment to violate intellectual property laws, so copyright, patents, trademarks, all that stuff is not allowed. And then employees also cannot share their credentials. They should only be using their credentials. It's assigned to them for a reason so that the company can tell who's doing what on its networks. The only time data should be taken out of the office is as part of the Department of Information Security's data backup process. When sensitive data is not in use, it does need to be secured. So for physical or hard copies, they need to be secured by lock and key, and encryption should be used on digital copies. Disposal of hard copies should be shredded, and the data owners will manage destroying any digital copies following the retention periods. B3SI does monitor all of its computers, networks, and internet services that are designated for business purposes. The Information Security Department does handle this monitoring. They look for policy or legal violations or security breaches, particularly. All B3SI devices have antivirus software. The Information Security Department manages this. Employees may not alter or deactivate programs without their permission, and the Information Security Department will push updates to devices, and users are responsible for ensuring the devices get updated. For physical security, all computers, networks, and internet services should be used at the office, excluding mobile technology issued to select B3SI employees. Those employees can use it out of office, but they must always store their devices in a secure location or on their person. Any B3SI equipment, like computers, do need to be locked when employees walk away from them so that the password's entered when they come back. Tailgating should be taken great care to avoid. Employees need to make sure unauthorized users can't sneak in behind them to access secure areas. B3SI does require end-to-end encryption when transferring data outside of B3SI. So for example, when sending emails, employees can report policy violations anonymously to the Information Security Department online. This is a preferred method, but they can also call the department via the phone to report them. Penalties for violating the policy do vary. They could include firing, coaching, reprimands, or unpaid administrative leave, among other things, but these are the most common penalties. The policy will be reviewed yearly, and for modification, the policy will be posted online. Employees will have 40 days to review it for any proposed changes and provide their input. After 40 days, it will be either submitted for approval or the revisions will be made. It will be posted online again, and then employees will have 20 days, and this process will repeat with the 20 days moving forward until the policy has been approved. or submitted for approval, hopefully approved. B3SI is not liable for employees violating the policy or committing crimes using its systems. And this policy does consider all applicable laws. And then changes will be reviewed at the next normal review session, unless our lawyers tell us to do it sooner. And this policy was created on 2/25/2020 and last updated on that date, with the next revision scheduled for 2/25/21. Regulatory issues considered when making this policy were data protection, privacy, and data retention. So the encryption and data storage, as well as privacy policies, focus on all three of these.